Hi guys, welcome back to another YouTube video. It's your tutor, Disha, and today we will be revising substance abuse. Substance abuse. What comes to your mind? The abuse of a substance, right? Abuse means to use something in a negative way or for a negative purpose. And the substance that we're talking about here is called a drug. A drug is a substance or chemical that changes the way we feel, think, or even behave when we ingest it into the body. Drugs can be either legal or illegal. Legal drugs are drugs that are permitted to use as prescribed by a doctor or accessible over the counter. For example, it's legal for us to consume alcohol in a certain limit. It's also legal for us to consume drugs that contains acetaminophen. Other examples of legal drugs include paracetamol and antibiotics. And then illegal drugs now are drugs that are unlawfully manufactured, possessed, bought, or sold. And they are also inhibited for use. And illegal drugs fall into three groups. We have hallucinogens like marijuana, LSD, and DMT. And these drugs change the mental state of people. We have stimulants that increase the activity of the body like nicotine, cocaine, and caffeine. And lastly, we have depressants. And depressants slow down the nervous system. Alcohol, barbiturate, heroin, morphine, those are all examples of depressants. Now, the consumption of drugs over time causes tolerance or dependence. Tolerance occurs when individuals develop a depleted response after taking drugs over time. So as the individual develops tolerance to a drug, that individual will need to consume more of the drug to achieve the same effect as when they start using it. For dependence, as the name suggests, the individual becomes dependent on the drug. So they can't function without taking the drug. So an individual can have physical dependence and psychological dependence. With physical dependence, the individual display withdrawal symptoms when they stop taking the drugs. And for psychological dependence, is the mental inability to stop using the drugs. So the individual will become obsessed. Then for your exam, remember now, you must know about alcohol and its consequences and smoking and its consequences. Let's talk a little bit more about alcohol and its consequences. When we're speaking about alcohol here, we're referring to ethanol. Ethanol is the alcohol that is present in wines, beers, and other drinks. Now, having small amounts of alcohol in our drinks is pretty much okay. But once we exceed a certain limit, then it can have some serious consequences on our body. Hence, alcohol should be consumed in moderate amounts. Since we're talking about moderate amounts, for men, the daily limits for alcohol for men is 3 to 4 units per day, and for women it's 2 to 3 units per day. Now let's talk about the consequences if we overconsume alcohol. And the consequences can be social and biological. Let's start with biological. So guys, do you remember the phospholipid bilayer that we did in unit 1? Remember that polar molecules can easily cross the phospholipid bilayer. And alcohols, they have an OH group attached to their structure, so they are polar. They can easily diffuse into the cell membrane. This can have short-term biological effects and long-term biological effects. So let's talk about the short-term effects. I classified alcohol as a depressant. In so saying, alcohol slows down the body's metabolism, including the nervous transmission, which in turn alters the mood, slows down the reflexes, and balance. In particular, alcohol increases the effect of the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain, which is the gamma aminobutyric acid, acronym is GABA, and GABA inhibits the action potentials. Alcohol can also cause serious short-term effects like fatty liver, in which the liver is unable to break down fat, hepatitis, which is the inflammation of the liver, distorted vision and hearing, and slurred speech. And then for the long-term biological effects, alcohol can cause cirrhosis of the liver, which is the destruction of the liver tissue. Over time, there can be a development of cancers. With the prolonged consumption of alcohol, then demyelination can occur, which is the loss of the myelin sheath, as well as the loss of neurons, and that results in intellectual disabilities like the loss of memory and the inability to do problem solving. Let's revisit some social effects of alcohol. And the social effects has to do with the behavior of the individual in the society. So with all of what we said about alcohol, in that it's a stimulant and it slows down our nervous transmission, alcohol makes it difficult for the consumer to make responsible decisions. So some social consequences could include drinking and driving, which results in numerous deaths per year, aggressive behavior towards family, towards co-workers, and then that could lead to domestic violence in the home, the breakdown of the family, and lastly, petty crimes. And finally, let's revisit smoking and its consequences. Similarly, again, smoking has social and biological consequences. So let me just remind you that the major objective for you to achieve here is to describe the effects of the components of cigarette smoke on the respiratory and cardiovascular system. That's all you need to achieve for this topic here. The components of cigarette smoke, we can find nicotine, tar, and the smoke itself contains carbon monoxide. So nicotine increases the blood pressure, the heart rate, and it can also harden the walls of the artery. Next, the tar coats the surface of the alveoli. It also paralyzes the cilia in the lungs, and we need the cilia to beat to remove all of the mucus that traps particles out of the lungs. Tar also contributes to emphysema, bronchitis, and lung cancer. Carbon monoxide is a poisonous gas. And from Cape Chemistry, and of any of my Cape Chemistry students here, you could recall we spoke about ligands. Yes, carbon monoxide has a greater affinity for the hemoglobin molecule than oxygen, and carbon monoxide competes with oxygen for the hemoglobin binding site, and that therefore decrease the amount of oxygen available in our body, lack of oxygen to the vital organs like the heart and the brain. Then for the social effects of smoking, society tends to discriminate against cigarette smokers in that they perceive that the smokers are dirty, unhealthy, and have bad breaths and so forth. In most cases, we have women shying away from being in relationships with smokers. People can become secondhand smokers, and they can become secondhand smokers from really just exhale the smoke from the person beside them smoking. So as a result, many times people tend to shy away from smokers because secondhand smoking is just as harmful as first-hand smoking. And in the Caribbean, you can see women and children developing diseases from being exposed to secondhand smoking. And finally, under substance abuse revision, you want to ensure that you capture the definition of common respiratory and cardiovascular diseases. Yes, I'm talking about emphysema, chronic bronchitis, lung cancer, vasoconstriction, stroke, and so on.